Welcome back to this edition of Inside Sports. I'm your host, Chris Marks. Today we are talking Maryland Terrapins sports with a guy who might know them the best, longtime DC sports writer, Patrick Stevens. Patrick, thank you for joining me here on today's show. And just give everyone a second to tell them who you're writing for now.
I'm working for my own website, discourse.com, basically a site that I've had between newspaper gigs in the past and have kind of revisited now. And so lots of local college sports coverage there, certainly a lot of Maryland, but a fair number of other schools as well.
You've been in the area a long time. You've covered Maryland sports for a long time. We're talking basketball now because we're into February, bearing down on March, and the Terps have a lot of work to do right now.
It certainly would appear that way at this stage. When you look at what Maryland's done and coming off the loss Sunday to Virginia, a team that I think now is 17-7, 5-6 in the ACC, a team that really only has one victory to hang its hat on, and that's against NC State, which hasn't entirely distinguished itself a whole lot over the last few weeks. And then you look at the non-conference strength of schedule, which is really just something that's dragging them down. And if Maryland is a borderline team, it's going to be very hard, historically speaking, for teams that are really borderline to get in playing the sort of non-conference schedules that Maryland has. Basically, they played Kentucky, Northwestern, Mason, and really a whole lot of scrapple after that. I mean, Stony Brook's a very solid team too, but there's a lot of bad teams on that schedule that they played. So Maryland really has winnowed its margin of error down quite a bit here, especially after the loss to Virginia.
When we talk about that, some of our viewers might be looking at Maryland's schedule and saying they do have 17 wins. Other teams with 15, 16 wins are in ahead of them right now. Why is that? And the strength of schedule is what's holding them down.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to pick up a bunch of victories, but if the teams that you beat really aren't that great, really, what does it matter at that stage? And so, one team's 25 victories at the end of the season might be worth about the same as another team's 20 or 21. And so, Maryland, when you look at it right now, it's especially when you look at the remaining schedule, they still got to play Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, Boston College, Clemson, all teams in the bottom half of the conference. There's only so many victories or opportunities for decent victories left for this team.
Now, when you talk about that, and they have to win these games, but a loss to a Clemson or a loss to a Wake Forest could be devastating from here on out.
Those could certainly be really damaging. And when you look at Maryland's profile, one of the best things it has going for them is that it hasn't messed up. I mean, there isn't a loss on there that they've had so far that makes you think, gosh, this team has no business being anywhere near the NCAA tournament. There's no shame in losing to Miami, to Kentucky, to Carolina, to Duke, Virginia, the Florida State losses. I mean, those are all explainable losses just on the surface. I mean, you're not going to sit there and dissect why did this happen on this given day. But just the idea that Maryland lost to Virginia or Maryland lost to Florida State, those things aren't necessarily unexplainable. It's when you get down and you're playing teams with RPIs well over 100 and you're losing those games, those are the things that are really head scratchers and that stand out in the selection to the selection committee as they're perusing all the profiles in the middle of March.
And we were talking about Virginia before we went on the air today, and they're an interesting team. They just beat Maryland, a team maybe on that same line with them, but they have some big wins, but also some big losses.
Virginia has one of the weirdest profiles I think I've ever seen. I mean, they're 6-0 against the top 100, and so you're looking at all these really good victories this team has. They've beaten NC State, they've beaten Wisconsin, they've beaten North Carolina, they've beaten Maryland, they've beaten Florida State. So they've beaten some solid teams, and most of those teams are somewhere in the conversation at this stage. And yet they've lost 6 games to teams outside the top 100, including just an absolutely befuddling loss to an Old Dominion team that has been just terrible for most of this season. And then you look at the fact that their non-conference strength of schedule isn't very good either. And so those are some amazing factors in play for Virginia. And so people might get caught up in the fact that I think they're 7-3 or something to that effect in the ACC. That only counts for so much. I mean, that isn't necessarily an automatic ticket, winning 12 or 13 league games. You got to do a lot of other stuff too. And Virginia's really in a weird spot. They'll be an interesting test case if things keep up for them.
No, if both teams hold serve and get back to Maryland, and Maryland wins the games they're supposed to win, loses the games they're supposed to lose, like it's going this year, and we get down to that regular season finale against Virginia, could that be possibly for an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament?
I doubt it would be that cut and dry. I mean, there's so many variables in play, and no team exists in a vacuum. I mean, yes, what Maryland and Virginia might do might impact each other, But that same day, you might have something important going on in the Missouri Valley. You might have something important going on in the Atlantic 10. And so there's all sorts of stuff going on that would really have that sort of impact. Could it influence it? It could certainly, it would certainly help Maryland not only to win, but also to deal Virginia a loss. But there's so many other teams in play here that you can't really look at it as just simply a play-in game at that stage.
Now, Mark Turgeon has a young team this year. Everyone knows that. But lately, you've told me off there that they've settled on the starting lineup for the last 3 games going forward.
It's the first time since December that Maryland has gone with the same starting lineup 3 games in a row. And so it's been Nick Faust, Des Wells, Jake Lehman, James Padgett, and Alex Len over that 3-game stretch. Now, the truth is that they've switched the lineup so much, I'm not sure you can sit there and feel certain that you're going to see that same lineup trotted out come Saturday when Duke comes to Comcast Center. So overall, yeah, I think it's probably as close to a base lineup as you can expect Maryland to play, but I don't think that means you're going to see that as your starting lineup all 5 games or however many games into the future.
Now, with this young lineup, and I know that Alex Len has had some big monster games. He's had some games that he hasn't played so well. What's going on with him?
Yeah, I think some of it's a matter of matchups for Alex Len. I mean, you look at the Virginia game, some of it's Virginia's defense is exceptional, the way that they play, the pack line defense, all that. It really does a great job of denying interior passes. And when you look at what Len did against Virginia last year, what he did on Sunday, I think it was 9 points and 5 rebounds, something along those lines. Really not that out of line. I mean, it was better, but certainly more minutes, and he's played better in general. You look at some of the games he's played, he's been very assertive, and that's really what Maryland needs. And there's some games where he hasn't been quite as assertive, and he's faced bigger guys, and teams have been able to contain him a little bit better. And so it's been an up and down year for him. And I think that you talk to the folks at Maryland, they emphasize this guy's 19 years old, he's still developing. And I think from a fan perspective, I think fans see this guy who's 7'1" and can hit mid-range jump shots and can really dominate around the rim and say, why can't he be that way all the time? And the truth is he hasn't gotten to the point where he's going to be that good all the time. And that's just the reality of the situation. So certainly they need a better version of Alex Len more often. But at the same time, there's going to be some inconsistency there.
Talk about the point guard play for the Terps this year.
It's really been one of those things that you just, it's been a little bit of roulette, really. You look at Pishon Howard, Seth Allen, Nick Faust, Des Wells has had a turn bringing the ball up the court a little bit. There just hasn't been one guy that Maryland's been able to settle on. You look back at non-conference play, and Pishon Howard played exceptionally well up through New Year's Day, and after that, things have gotten a bit harder. He actually has played a little bit better the last couple games, particularly against Virginia. But at the same time, he hasn't been as efficient as he was earlier in the season against weaker competition. Nick Faust with the current lineup, Nick Faust has been running the point about as much as anybody has. And there's a little bit of, there's an upside and downside to that. I think that one of the things you get out of that is that you can match up in really interesting ways when you have a 6'6" point guard. And certainly I think Faust enjoys the idea of having the ball in his hands at all times. I think the other thing it does is it puts you in a spot where Faust isn't limited in the number of touches he has and isn't as likely to go and shoot the ball every time he has an open look. At the same time, you're putting a guy at the point that really isn't a natural point guard, and a guy whose decision making isn't going to be the same as somebody that's played there his entire life. And that's no knock on Nick. I think that's just kind of a reality. And I think that he's been okay, but I don't think they really have a true obvious answer at this stage. I mean, in the long run, it might be a situation where you see maybe a little bit more of Seth Allen. We've seen that a little bit more, of him kind of running things and just kind of taking a gamble that the good that he's going to be able to do by creating an offense is going to outweigh maybe a couple bad decisions that he's going to make as a freshman. One
guy who's gotten more and more minutes as the year has progressed has been Jake Lehman. Can you talk about him real quick?
It's been really interesting watching Jake kind of go from a guy that you were really wondering how much he belonged, watching, a lot of games in December and whatnot. And he comes back from Christmas and he plays really well in a couple games. Played exceptionally against Virginia Tech when he drew what seemed like a really random start at the time and comes out and scores 20 points. And so he's kind of gotten himself settled, and his defense has gotten a lot better. And really, one of the smart things that Maryland has done really over the last couple of weeks is try to make sure it has either Lehman or Logan Ehrenholt on the floor at the same time. So you have at least one somewhat credible, especially credible in the case of Ehrenholt, outside shooter on the floor at all times. And so I think that between improved defense and being able to knock down shots. He didn't do that against Virginia, but he has done it a fair bit over the course of conference play. I think that he's been a guy that's really improved quite a bit here over the last month and a half.
Now we got about a minute left. What do you think the Terps have to do to make a run to get to the NCAA tournament?
At this point, when you look at their profile, there's only so much quality that they're going to have. They've got NC State, they can get Duke, they can get Carolina, and maybe they can get some stuff at the ACC tournament. And so the only way that they can really do a whole lot is to just pile up so much quantity, however middling some of it is, and just hope that that's enough, and to avoid doing anything just foolish. And so there isn't like a set magic number in terms of the number of victories that you need. But if you could just pile up wins, and I believe the number now is 7 league games plus the conference tournament. They're at 17 victories now. If they got themselves to 24, 25 victories overall. That's not a magic number, mind you, but at least there's enough quantity there, and there's probably not something that's enough of a black eye that at least keeps them in the conversation. The easiest way for them to get themselves somewhere in a credible mix is to beat Duke on Saturday at Comcast Center. And beyond that, there really isn't a whole lot that's going to stand out on the rest of that regular season schedule.
Okay, well, that's our basketball talk with the Maryland Terps. We have to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more Terps sports with Patrick Stevens. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back.